Hi, I'm back again with another chapter. So for those of you tuning in, I am currently reading my dad's manuscripts. And tonight I'm reading chapter 8, which means I am not starting at the beginning. So if you want to hear the beginning, go back to some of my past broadcasts and you can hear the beginning of the story. Or if you want to hear a different story altogether, I have a bunch of other ones that are also in my past broadcasts as well. So, but without further ado, I'm going to launch right into it. Tonight's story is called A Voice in the Darkness, and this is, as I said before, chapter 8. Winter was not the time to be on the sea. Gales might come up suddenly. Gales that a galley would be hard-pressed to ride out. Even the highly experienced captains of the Imperial fleet preferred to spend the winters in port, or, at the most, making short excursions before returning. Though the port of Plutarch was close to them, men who knew ships assured Doleg that there were any number of inlets along the coast where the Imperial Navy could shelter. The captain of the ship which carried the liquid fire had been loath to allow such dangerous stuff on his ship, and had drawn the line completely at carrying the prince as well. I'll take a risk now and again, Lord Prince, but I won't be carrying yourself as well as that fire stuff. I might well be the man who lost his vessel through trial of a new weapon, but I'll not be the man who lost his prince. He's right, Lord Prince, Padra had said. Doleg had looked around at the people gathered. He could see the expression on most faces, but he suspected that most were happy that Padra had spoken. This left Doleg and a few others watching the lead ship at what the captain had hoped was a safe distance. "Ship's up the starboard bow!" Everyone strained their eyes in that direction. Shortly thereafter, dots appeared in that direction. Orders were shouted, and the rowers on the starboard side backed their oars as those on the port side continued to row, and the ship turned in that direction. The captain of the fleet shouted orders, and the fleet, according to agreed plan, stopped and waited while the ship carrying the liquid fire went out in front. The rest of the fleet followed, at a slower pace. Apparently, the commander of the Imperial fleet felt that a single ship of his was sufficient to deal with the Lantha ship, for one ship moved out of the Imperial fleet, bearing down on the ship bearing the liquid fire. The Lantha captain let his ship drift to a stop, as though offering itself to the attack. "Come on, man," Doleg muttered. "He'll know it's a trap and pull away." "The men with that liquid fire stuff aren't seamen," the bearded captain of Doleg's ship had said beside him. "He's trying to give them the best chance he can." Even when the cover was thrown off the liquid fire pump, and the Imperial captain came on, though it was possible he had no notion of what this apparatus was or could do. The pump crews had had a hurried introduction to the use of their equipment from the deck of a ship at sea, without the actual fire, and it was not possible to know just how much information had come to the Imperial fleet. From the appearances, either the information had not come through, or else it had been discounted. On the Lantha side, the pump crews had a fair idea of the range of their weapon, and Borelus had done some tinkering with it, and managed to increase the range somewhat. As the prince watched, the pump went to work. First there was a splattering of liquid on the water as the crew found the range. Then, as the liquid reached the ship, fire was touched to it. The Lantha ship heeled over suddenly as the rowers applied their oars, for the Imperial ship aflame from Boda's ships came on. The Imperial ship was no longer under control, for some of the oars fouled others, and oarsmen fled their posts for fear of the fire that was killing the others. Many of the crew were abandoning ship. Some of them were already burning, but Doleg knew that the water would not put out the flames. It was a horrible thought, a horrible sight, but horror was one of the faces of war. The Imperial ship came in at the Lantha ship, and once more the stream of flame leaped out. This Imperial captain was faster to act, though, and back to his ship immediately. Only a small part of the flaming liquid fell on his ship, and the crew went to work fighting the fires. Some of the liquid fell on the water between the two ships, and lay there, a puddle of flame. Something splashed in the water next to the ship bearing the liquid fire, and Doleg looked up. The rest of the Imperial fleet were standing well off, using the ballistæ mounted on their foredecks, which outranged at the pump by a considerable margin. "Get yourselves out of there!" Doleg knew they couldn't hear him, not at this distance, and with so much noise going on. But the captain was aware of what was going on. The ship began to move back and away. More stones landed in the water around it, one even smashing splinters from the ship's railing. But the ship kept moving. A small, sturdy sailor was at Doleg's side. "Lord Prince, captain's compliments," and he's about to turn and make for the harbor. "Fine," Doleg said. "Take him, my thanks." "Won't work so well next time, Lord Prince." The captain was apparently especially dressed for the occasion, tunic and trousers, with only a few spots of salt and a pair of boots that clearly hurt his feet. "Next time out, they see anything mounted on our deck, they'll stand up and smash us to splinters with their ballistæ." The king pursed his lips. "I'm afraid you're right. Captain, do you have any suggestions?" "Me, Lord Prince? No, not my field, I'm afraid. I suppose a person could load jars of the stuff and shoot 'em over by catapult. It'd be a dangerous matter, and now that some of us have seen their stuff really at work, I don't know a captain would be willing to risk one of those jars getting away from the catapult crew and setting his own ship ablaze." "True. Your suggestion is not without merit, though. We can arm the catapults on our seaward walls and with jars of stuff. Keep the Imperials from coming in too close." "Well, Lord Prince, the tax collectors have been assigned. Although the taxes no longer go to the Emperor, the same men will be collecting them in most cases. It's a matter of using the most experienced people." Doleg frowned. "You're suggesting someone might see the same tax collector and assume he's collecting for the Emperor, and perhaps refuse to pay?" Osmond Isder shrugged. "Such a thing is not entirely unlikely here and there." Doleg shook his head. "Every tax collector will have a bodyguard of soldiers of the principality with him. Hard to mistake that for some scoundrel misrepresenting himself as a taxman." He thought a bit further. "More likely look for some fool convincing his neighbors that the prince has done away with taxes, and organize them to ambush the taxman and his guard. Perhaps a word to the collectors would be proper." "So, is there any news from the frontier?" "Not much, Lord Prince. There's a rumor that the Nanisses are beginning to recover from the plague. Even an occasional rumor that they're going to be coming after us in the summer. No one's sure, though." "And that rebel chieftain was only a wishful thinking, then?" "I'm afraid so, Lord Prince. There's still a rumor or two, but I think that's all wind. There are other rumors, though. The shamans and the Nanisses are blaming the plague on you, and are planning to retaliate." "Nothing more than that?" "Only a reference to creating the skin one, or the hide one, depending on who's doing the translating. It seems to be some sort of ancient legendary monster. I'd suggest we don't worry about it until we have more information." "Yes. Well, thank you for your time, Osmond Isder." When Doleg returned to his quarters that evening, he found Borlus seated there, drinking a glass of wine. The prince paused. My guards aren't sufficiently aware, it seems." Borlus smiled slightly. "Aware enough for most things. I needed to talk to you, and I didn't think it could wait for our official appointment." "I see. And what dread danger did you come to warn me about now?" "Very good surmise. I'm led to believe, by one means or another, that the Nanisses are blaming the plague on you. I'm not sure how much of that is guesswork, and to what extent they've tracked it to me. Knowing that I work for you, they put the blame on you. Whatever way it goes, they're apparently planning on the make of some sort of construct. One might say it's a rough attempt at a pranchka, something the shamans have seldom attempted. I know something of the abilities of the shamans, and this is something known in long ago times. I'll have to study it, see what its abilities and limitations might be. Even worse, I'll have to do these studies mostly from traveler stories, which are notoriously incomplete and exaggerated. You told us that a pranchka can't cross water. Large bodies of water, no, but they can leap across streams and even rivers sometimes. But this is not the pranchka that you and I know, and may well have abilities we don't know. My first concern was a general warning to you. I don't think you need worry for another few weeks, and in that time I will be studying as well. I will let you know more when I know more myself. Thank you. The magistrate Obakar was back, without his deputation. Lord Prince, I understand that the servants of the so-called third god will be holding their own spring procession this year. I beg you to forbid it, Lord Prince. Why should I forbid it? Lord Prince, they are an affront to the true worshippers of the divine pair. They do this, and in our faces, and dare us to take measures against them. What measures might you take, magistrate? That is the point, Lord Prince. You have enjoined peace on us, and fined both groups for the unfortunate occurrence this fall on your return to the city. But it is claimed that you have favored them, for you have forbidden measures against them. In the meantime, heartened by this, they have grown bolder and provoke us the more. I don't favor them, magistrate. If they start trouble, even if they fail to try to avoid trouble, they are fined as well. All I have forbidden is that my citizens mistreat each other. Lord Prince, by not forbidding them to carry out their abominable practices, you have favored them in some minds. I fear little good will come of it. Dole gave him a close look and thought, is this as close as you dare come to saying you're wrong, Lord Prince, I wonder? He paused for a moment. I shall have to call in a representative of their god's folk, and tell them to behave themselves, to carry out their worship without provocations. I hope that will do, because I'm not going to give one group of my people official freedom to murder another group. You are dismissed. The emperor stood leaning on his horse, sheltered by a clump of willows, some distance from the battleground. It had been a horrible, grinding business, with neither side giving an inch, but toward the end of the day, one section of the imperial line was no longer able to hold. They'd been levies, of course, men and boys only just taken from farms, and at the end, they hadn't the stamina or the mental will to withstand against this sort of battle. The men around him had hastened him away when they saw what was happening. A lost battle was one thing, and something could be more easily repaired than a lost emperor. No, this loss would not be that easily repaired either. The only small bright speck in the storm was that the Ghaznavids had suffered losses nearly as bad as the Empire. They would not be swarming over his land immediately. That made the grim set of his mouth even grimmer. A significant defeat might be the signal for someone, somewhere, to make a try for a seat. He'd done all he could to see to it that there were a few people who had both the ambition and resources, but you couldn't destroy every aristocrat in the Empire. He looked at the faces around him, faces tight with concern. One of his guards spoke. August ruler, we'd be best to ride with some more if you're able. They'll be pursuing us for sure. Yes, I can ride. I'll have to. He wondered just how any enemy might pick out the tracks of his party from all the other trails fleeing the gory mess back there. On the other hand, one was best to assume that the worst would always happen, and that some band of enemy horse would happen on their track and follow it. Commander, what is the nearest city that might be safe? I'd suggest we make for Addis, August ruler. Tevatru was sufficiently aware of geography to know that was at least 100 miles from where they were. Worse, it was 100 miles infested by Ghaznavids, looting, pillaging, and harrying his army, not to mention harrying him. Well, let's be on our way then. It might be another year, most likely too, before he could get an army together again, but he would. The Geshnapis were nigh as battered as the Imperial forces. He held on to that like a good luck piece. Erokavai was adamant, or at least as close to adamant as he could be when he was speaking to his ruler. Lord Prince, I will not deny there are some fools among the people who I represent who go out of their way to attract attention, but they are a few only. The truth is that for many people who reject the third god, our mere existence is sufficient provocation. Doleg frowned. Arakovai, I am rapidly becoming weary of both sides in this affair. Don't you think that, as a smaller group, you should walk carefully around the larger group? I've been making every effort to prevent my people from massacring each other. If the day ever comes, though, that I am forced to make a stand for one group or another, do you not think I will choose the larger group? Lord Prince, I can only do what I can do. Keep your people in line, Arakovai. You will not like the result if I must make special efforts to do so. Well, I hope I look decent enough to be seen in the company of Prince Doleg. You look just fine, Osmini. That shade of green suits you quite well, and is just the thing you should be wearing to celebrate spring. I'm sure I do, Grumia. It's the tone of the invitation. Prince Doleg thinks it would be fitting for his bride-to-be to accompany him to the spring feast at the Temple of the Divine Pair on Palace Street. What would you prefer, Osmini? A poem in praise of your beautiful eyes? Hertia smiled. I suppose you're right. If he did send me a poem, I'd be claiming that he had some secretary write it for him, not to mention criticizing his penmanship. Am I that much of a grouch, Grumia? Not always, Osmini. Only when things press you, and even then, you usually endeavor to do the right thing anyway. Except for times when I nearly took the head of Prince Doleg when we first met. Not a good start with someone I'm going to marry. And don't go telling me that he wasn't the prince then, as if that excuses things. Gurmy clicked her tongue. Osmini, sometimes you worry about the silliest things. This is near as bad as wanting to go off in the wild looking for a wandering prince. Start from here and try to make the best of things, rather than to look back over your shoulder to see how badly things have gone. Well, Dolia, it's a fine day for the spring festival. Blue sky, only a cloud here and there. The folk who see omens and such things will probably say it bodes well for the rest of the year. I hope so. We can use some good omens. Well, there's the story that the Emperor suffered a bad defeat at the hands of the Geshnapis last fall. Or do you refuse to let that cheer you up? There's that. I think the notion of my being required to make a showing at the festival annoys me. Is that the divine pair can't do everything they have to without my presence. Ah, I see Osmini Hertemini is attending. I'd half expected her to stay away specifically because I asked her to come. Ha! You sound almost like an 8-year-old boy insisting he doesn't like girls. Though both the prince and his betrothed attended the festival because they were not yet married, they did not sit together. In deference to the pacific nature of the festival, the prince did not wear armor, only a leather jacket with carefully placed plates of iron sewn in, and over that, a tunic of forest green. Instead of a proper helmet, he only wore a light cap of iron. Doleg declared that he would not be going out among his people dressed as if they were the enemy. He was not totally careless, however. His bodyguard were all present, all armed and armored properly. If some fool or madman or paid assassin made an attempt on the prince's life, it was the duty of the bodyguard to stop that person before he came close enough to be a danger to the lightly armed prince. Before the spring festival meal, Doleg and Hertemini met and spoke, very briefly. Fine day for a spring festival, Doleg said. Very nice indeed. I hear some folks saying it's a good omen for the rest of the year. May it be so indeed. Completely unmemorable words, Doleg thought as he took his seat. But at least we managed to both get through it without either one saying something that sounded snide or nasty. May it be so. Oh. He recalled Borla's saying, in older times, the feast and the following procession to the oldest spring were boisterous affairs, and the procession more of a winding, tipsy jaunt. As time went on, though, particularly when rulers were involved, the whole thing became so wound about decorum and proper behavior that there were even occasional suggestions regarding replacing the festival wine with water. But because wine, the fruit of the grape, is such a powerful symbol of the renewal of the earth in spring, such suggestions has always been quashed. Doleg did note, though, that the wine that was served at the tables had come to be well watered. He also noticed that this had had an effect of causing one or two of the company to take a cup or two of less watered wine before leaving their houses for the feast. Still, the procession that came from the temple in the palace to the oldest spring began as a quiet affair. The traditional calls of "Spring rises, be joyful" were spoken in tones that often sounded more tentative and celebratory. Other processions from other temples joined them along the way, and as many of these were less bound by notions of propriety and decorum, they helped make the thing less somber. At the spring, though, the processions sponsored by the followers of the Divine Pair met with one formed with the worshippers of the Holy Three. There were no unbiased witnesses as to what happened. Even Doleg's guards, cold sober, and followers of the Divine Pair, had their own partialities. And the place where the actual trouble began was out of sight for both Doleg and Padra. When the angry shouts broke over the crowd's shouts of celebration, Doleg knew at once what it was. "Come on," he said to his guards. "The fools are at it again." With Padra coming up behind, shouting at him for a God's lost fool, the prince forced his way through the crowd. The biggest problem was that neither side in the dispute wore or carried any distinguishing symbols or clothing. Identifying who was friend and who was foe depended largely on what the person in front of you was shouting, and sometimes you just hit whoever was in front of you because you didn't recognize their face. Stones and missiles were being thrown now, and though whenever people recognized the prince through their rage, they usually stopped their fighting, there were always people who hadn't seen him through the crowd, and people who were just too angry to care. Doleg caught sight of the missile at the last moment, a hurling black object seen out of the corner of his eye, just too late to duck. The light helmet rang with the impact, and the whole world reeled. The next thing, he was aware of someone turning him over on his back, and a shout of, "They've killed him!" There was a deep roaring of sound in his ears. He tried to tell him he wasn't dead, but was never sure that he'd actually gotten the words out. Hertia heard the noise, but wasn't immediately aware of what the trouble was. Then the prince, who had carefully stayed not quite at her side, but near, went rushing off with a shout. She began moving in that direction. "Riot, Osmany," Captain Drizzt said. "Best stay put." She hesitated a moment, then shook her head. "No, he's headed that way. I want to go too." Unsaid were the words, "I want to see what he's up to this time." She started off quickly, pulling her arm out of Captain Drizzt's gentle grip, and after that her guard could only move along with her, hoping to put themselves between her and any serious trouble. She saw the prince striding in, striking here and there, not at random, but picking his targets on some basis she couldn't make out. One interesting thing was that his sword remained in its scabbard. He was using instead a staff he'd apparently confiscated from someone. He was shouting, too, but you couldn't make out what he was shouting. She saw the stone hit him, saw him go down. His guard surrounded him where he lay. She was close enough to hear by the time someone said, "He's dead." "God and Goddess, not again! Widowed before I'm married!" Then disaster struck. The prince's guard leveled spears and went into the crowd. No pushing and striking with spear butts now. They were out for revenge. She went on one knee beside the prince, who was leaning on Padra's knee, head lolling terribly, blood still flowing from the wound. She looked at Padra. He's not dead. I know, but hadn't you better get those guards under control? Captain Drizzt, have one of your men hold the prince up while I take care of him. Go on, Padra. The guards are more likely to listen to you than to me. Go on now. Doleg felt firm hands on his face, wrapping a bandage around his head. There was also a fierce muttering voice he could just barely hear. Not this time, gods rot you, prince. Not another one dying before we're married. This is only a crack on the forehead. Probably didn't do any damage with brains you have. What made you think you were personally responsible for stopping a riot with your bare hands? There was a lot of shouting and screaming going on, the sort of thing one heard on a battlefield. But what was Osmany Hertemini doing on a battlefield? What battlefield was it, anyway? His befogged mind began to recall things in patches. He'd been moving toward the sound of battle? Then something had happened. He must have been hit on the head, because it was his head that she was bandaging. All right, he said, then tried again. I'm all right. All right, huh? A bloody head, and your guard are going crazy, killing everyone in sight because they think you're dead. Some things are more right than others. Now, don't you go trying to get up and sort things out. Padra's handling that. How much do you think you could calm your guards down anyway with yourself all bloody? Sorry, was all he could think of to say. Thinking did not seem to be one of his strengths right now. There was a pause. Yes, I'm sorry too. I've been holding a lot of foolish things against you from the time you came in on me in the wreckage of my wagon. You being all calm and lordly and willing to make everything better. But today you weren't out to punish people, were you? Just trying to keep them from killing each other. No, I guess I won't go into the woods looking for wandering princes. That last was too confusing for him. He was still trying to make sense of the whole day when some of his guards tried to get him onto a litter made of cloaks over spear shafts. By then he was able to assert himself. No! Help me up! Help me walk! You carry me off, we'll be 6 weeks battling rumors that I'm dead. Hertemini clicked her tongue, and at that but said nothing. Padra took one of Doleg's arms and put it around his shoulders, then put a sturdy arm around the prince's waist. Doleg heard him mutter, Foolish business is that, sir. I've told you before, crowd control is not something for the prince to handle himself. Hush, Padra. Osmany Hertemini's already given me a scolding over that. He wanted to say more, but found that he had to concentrate on making his feet work. Being hauled away with his toes dragging would not be much better than being hauled away on a stretcher. Doleg looked over his guards. He wore a bandage round his head as a result of yesterday's events, but it was not the bandage that aggravated him, and the headache that had died down to something close to tolerable by this morning. Well, you've done extremely well for yourselves, haven't you? Going mad because your prince was a little slow to duck? You could have waited at least until you were sure I was dead before you rushed off to avenge me by killing everyone in sight. You've presented me with a problem, you know that? I plan to levy a stiff fine against both parties involved in the riot, and it's going to be somewhat less to do so when my guards have run mad killing citizens in some misguided attempt at vengeance. I certainly hope your captains can explain to you, by one means and another, just what your duties consist of. You are all confined to barracks until further notice, save when actually on duty. You are dismissed. The magistrate and the carpet weaver were eyeing each other with frank hostility. Well, sirs, it needs no saying that I'm annoyed and disappointed. Lord Prince, it was that bunch of drunkards that were the cause of it all. Not so, Lord Prince. We are a peaceful gathering until that lot of self-righteous snoots came along. We were entitled to be there. You're an affront to the true gods. You... Stop! Doleg saw the anger replaced by apprehension as they realized that they'd been bickering in the presence of the prince, a show of disrespect that could conceivably have dire consequences. He carried on. I believe there's been fault enough and to spare on both sides. I am told that a certain person who through a certain wine flask perished in the affray. That must be considered very convenient. I am disposed at the moment, so be merciful. You, magistrate, and you, carpet weaver, will be held in surety until such a time as a fine of 200 pounds of silver is paid by each group. There will also be a requirement of a bond in each group to keep the peace. Another will be 500 pounds of silver each. He saw objections coming through the initial stunned silence, and held up a hand. No, you will say nothing further to the case, neither in blame nor in self-exculpation. The matter is dealt with. Messengers will be sent to each group to inform them as to what has been decided here. Guards, take them away. Okay, and that is another chapter for tonight. So this one was a little shorter, and it really spans over a lot of time, which I think needs to be talked about, I think. I mean, you can kind of brush over things, but I'd like more development there. It feels like there just needs to be a little bit more of everything, because there's just all these little tiny cut scenes, and they seem a little too short for my liking anyway. But that's just my personal opinion. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to say goodnight for now, and I will talk to you again soon. Thank you for tuning in.